Is the big one coming? Well, scientists say that a 9.3 magnitude quake is possible as California continues to rumble. John Austin over at The Express is reporting that a devastating 9.3 magnitude earthquake powerful enough to unleash a tsunami could actually strike the west coast of America after a series of tremors on a major fault line. They write that emergency services are already preparing for how to deal with a terrible offshore earthquake in the Cascadia subduction zone off the west coast of America near California. Now, they also state in the last 10 days, there's been 9 earthquakes of magnitude 3 or greater nearby, according to the USGS, leading to fears of what may be to come. The scientists say both the California fault lines and the Cascadia subduction zone are long overdue for a major earthquake of magnitude 8 or above.
Comments from Frank-Walter Steinmeier have been dubbed as outrageous by some here in Germany, with many claiming that he's trying to cause a rift within the NATO alliance. That has been reflected elsewhere around Europe as well. But there are those that have stood alongside him, saying that these type of NATO war games that we've seen just aren't necessary. Let's have a listen to what the German foreign minister actually had to say.
What we shouldn't do now is inflame the situation further through saber-rattling and warmongering. Whoever believes that a symbolic tank parade on the alliance's eastern border will bring security is mistaken.
Well, we have seen an increase in the amount of NATO activity that's been going on in Eastern Europe. Most recently, Operation Anaconda saw NATO flex its muscles in Poland. Well, when we say NATO, ultimately we really do mean the United States military. They're the biggest contributors when it comes to personnel, and certainly by a long shot when it comes to financing. But it does seem these comments we're hearing coming from Germany and other nations in Europe, that some of the EU members of the alliance are becoming disenchanted with the direction Washington's pushing them in.
Russia is open for discussion and has repeatedly expressed its readiness for dialogue. However, we now again, as it was in the Second World War, don't see positive reactions. On the contrary, NATO is strengthening its rhetoric and its aggressive actions close to our borders. In this environment, we must pay special attention to strengthening our country's defense capabilities.
we never really came out of the 2007-2008 recession. We had massive fiscal stimulus. We had massive monetary stimulus. In other words, if you just throw money at the system, then spending goes up, but there are still huge imbalances. And in my view, the world is facing very, very low growth going forward, very low growth. And that there are structural reasons for that. We have a horrible, and I repeat, horrible bureaucracy in Brussels, the EU, that basically is a slave of the US. The US dictates a lot of policies in Europe, including they bought or blackmailed Mrs. Merkel to be hostile against Russia. Russia and Germany and Russia and Europe were historically very close to each other. But this has now changed. And actually, one reason I'm quite optimistic about Russia, I believe the people of Europe, they don't want to have an embargo against Russia. It's just the governments that do that. The ordinary people, they have actually a lot of sympathy for Russia and for Mr. Putin. We had already free trade for hundreds of years between different countries. And we had merchant families in the world that traded goods and so forth. I don't think that for free trade, you need an EU or you need a Trans-Pacific Partnership. You can have bilateral agreements for free trade. What you certainly do not need for free trade is a country like the US that declares an embargo. They had an embargo against Myanmar. They had an embargo against Cuba. For what? They have an embargo against Russia. You think Russia cannot buy a Mercedes car? They can import everything through China. And the Americans, they think the embargo will hurt Russia. They're ridiculous. I have to laugh about these Panama Papers because it's obvious. It's another hidden attack against Russia, the Russian government, and other wealthy people around the world. Fact is simply, if I open a company in the British Virgin Islands, in Panama, anywhere in the world, I have to declare the beneficial ownership. But you don't have to declare the beneficial ownership in a Delaware company in the US. So it's a hypocritical act, once again, initiated by people in the US who want basically to put down foreign regimes. It's like if FIFA was an American organization, nothing would happen. But it happens that FIFA built up the biggest business in the world, which is soccer. And it happens that the World Cup will be played in Russia and not in the US. So obviously they target FIFA.
Of someone leaving the EU, England or anybody, is that the EU is the way Washington controls Europe. It's much easier to control an unaccountable EU Commission than a whole bunch of separate governments. As the professor, I think it was from Georgetown University in 2000, discovered in the National Archive, released CIA documents proving that the EU was a CIA creation. This was reported in the year 2000 in England by Ambrose Evans Pritchard in the London Telegraph. And so the whole political reorganization, reinvention of Europe is an American operation. And it's very much in Washington's interest, both as a control mechanism, but also as the political unity of NATO. Because without NATO, Washington doesn't have the foreign bases to exercise hegemony, the hegemony over Russia that they're willing to risk World War III over. People don't appreciate, but right now, the tensions between Russia and the United States, due to Washington, are far higher than they ever were during the Cold War. So you see, that's why, I mean, the real importance of Brexit is that. It unravels NATO, and therefore it removes the ability of the United States to coerce the Europeans into a conflict with Russia. Well, it's just part of the neoconservatives asserting world hegemony. So that's a very serious problem for peace, because the Russians and Chinese are not going to submit to being American vassals like the European countries and Japan and Australia and Canada. So it's a recipe for conflict with two nuclear powers. There's no prospect whatsoever of the United States or NATO or both engaging Russia or China, much less both countries simultaneously, in conventional war. So the war would be nuclear, and there's no winners of that war. Life would simply cease. So it's very important in that sense that the political organization and military organization that Washington has set up and for its imperial uses, for expanding its empire, opposing its empire, be broken up. And so that's why it's important for Britain to leave, because I think it would begin an unraveling, particularly now that the EU is used by the richer northern countries, the Dutch, the Germans, to loot the poor southern countries like Portugal and Greece, Spain and Italy. With the EU now turning on its own members, there's plenty of reason for the system to unravel. So if a major member were to vote to exit, such as Britain, that would probably be the death knell of the EU, and that would in turn lead to the unraveling of NATO. And therefore, this would remove the ability of Washington to cause conflicts.
Europa wurde vorgesehen praktisch als Wirtschaftsunion, eine Kolonie, würde ich eher sagen, der Amerikaner, die zum Markt dient, aber niemals ökonomisch stärker werden darf als die amerikanische Wirtschaft. Wenn man die europäische Wirtschaft heute zusammenzählt, dann ist sie um etwa 10% stärker als die amerikanische. Das heißt, vom Bruttosozialprodukt aus gesehen. Und das wollen natürlich die Amerikaner nicht. Deshalb muss immer wieder die Europa runtergedrückt werden. Deshalb wurde die Krise 2007, 2008, 2009 geschaffen, die bis heute Auswirkungen hat, um den Euro zu drücken, damit er nicht stärker wird als der Dollar und den Dollar nicht aus der Weltwährung, das heißt aus der Weltreservewährung verdrängen könnte. Es gibt Leute, die sagen, die Europäische Union zerbricht am Euro. Ich würde es umgekehrt sagen. Ich würde sagen, die Währung, die zerbricht an einer Union, die gar keine ist, die keine Solidarität hat, die keine gemeinsamen politischen Ziele hat und die von außen manipuliert wird. Und von außen meine ich nicht nur von Brüssel, denn Brüssel selbst wird manipuliert von Washington. Die Europäische Union, so wie sie jetzt ist, sage ich mal, die kann nicht reformiert werden. Die kann, so wie sie heute gestaltet ist, mit der Bürokratie in Brüssel, mit den Diktatoren wie Juncker, der einfach die Regeln ändert, wie es ihm passt, kann die nicht reformiert werden. Und deshalb kann ich mir vorstellen, dass Brexit ein Zeichen ist für viele Länder, die sagen, na, yes we can. Ich glaube, es ist wirklich eine Chance für andere Länder nachzudenken und sich zu regruppieren und für sich selber zu sagen, tja, die Briten haben es gekonnt, wir denken immer noch darüber nach und haben Angst gehabt nach den Folgen, jetzt können wir es auch wagen.
When we look at what's going on with Brexit and the crisis that's there, I would say that fundamentally what we're seeing now is stage two. It looked like they could not win the election, so now the stage two is to break it. They want to try to create a crisis. It was a Project Fear to try to persuade people not to get out of the European Union. Now that vote has been taken and they could not shut that down, they are trying to do everything they can to make all of the dire predictions of economic consequences come true. They want a do-over. And we see this from the younger voters complaining, the millennials complaining about the baby boomer generation, saying, we're the ones who are going to have to live with this. We want to be in the European Union, but you're the ones who wanted to get out. Now just understand, if we go back and look at the history, there was also a referendum back in 1975. 2/3 of the voters then opted to stay in the EU. 4 years later, it had flipped the other way around. Most of them wanted to leave. And these are the people, the baby boomers, who have been living under this EU for 40 years. So this is not about racism, as I like to say. It's not even about economic issues. It is fundamentally about sovereignty. It is about a loss of control. Whether or not you're going to be a serf to someone else, someone who is going to write the laws for you, unelected people at a distant location who have their own agenda, and they're not going to allow you to have elected representatives who are going to write the laws. That's what's been going on in Europe for a very long time. It's what we see happening here in spades, for example. And yet today, we see, even after the election, we still see David Cameron doubling down, saying this is about xenophobia, it's about racism, and it's not. It is about sovereignty. David Cameron, when they were having the debates, said, don't vote for Brexit based on the flyers coming out from UKIP. He said, they're telling you it's 350 million pounds a week going net to Brussels. No, it's not that much. It's a different number, whatever. It doesn't matter. It can be any number, and Brussels can change it at will. He said, they're telling you that Turkey is going to come in. Don't worry, that won't happen for until after I'm out of office. And then he says, and they're telling you there's a European army. But understand that what they're concerned about is not just Britain leaving, but a whole slew of nations leaving. 40% of Swedes, Poles, and Belgians are in the same vote. And we've also got Finland, Hungary, Portugal, Slovakia, France, Holland, Italy, Austria. Many of those say they would like to have a vote as well. What are they doing to fight this? Well, it's out of the election stage right now. So what they are doing is they're basically holding a gun to people's heads with the stock markets, manipulating these markets. We've seen HSBC get caught 2 times at least, okay, convicted twice of money laundering for drug cartels and for terrorists getting away with it. We've seen all these big banks now who are creating crisis around Brexit. These are the banks that manipulated the LIBOR exchange, the London Interbank Rate Exchange that is the basis of all variable rate mortgages. We've seen them manipulate currencies. We've seen them manipulate commodities, stock exchanges. Every kind of market has been manipulated by these bankers. And now what they're saying is, this is HSBC coming out saying, well, we're going to take 70,000 jobs out of London. We're already planning to move 1,000 workers from London to Paris, and it's going to start next week. They haven't even started the process of leaving, but immediately they're pulling this out because they want to make it as financially painful as possible, trying to get people to reverse themselves. They saw this happen in 1975. They saw people change their mind. They've already got people saying, well, we got to have a do-over. They're going to try to make it as difficult as possible. They are selling off the pound. We're seeing S&P downgrading the entire country, downgrading all the UK. How long did it take them to downgrade these bankers and these people who were playing games with mortgages in the financial crisis? There's absolutely no basis for these mortgages, for Lehman Brothers, for these other companies. They're expecting Standard & Poor's and Fitch and all these other rating agencies to downgrade them, and they don't do it. And these guys are making bets based on the bankruptcy of this mortgage market. And yet Standard & Poor's refuses to downgrade, and these guys went bankrupt. And yet in one day, you see Standard & Poor's downgrade the entire nation of Great Britain. This is the way they're trying to punish people. And it's not just that. They're talking about how English will not be the official European Union language, will not be one of the languages. Of course, they have 24 official languages. It is a veritable Tower of Babel. They self-consciously reference, and we've talked about the artwork at Brussels and the European Union, how they reference the Tower of Babel for a world government as well. But they're going to remove English. Well, you know, the true nature of English is it is the lingua franca of the 21st century, and it has that status as a de facto status. They're trying to create a European superstate. They're going to do it out of fear. Project Fear is not over with the election. Project Fear is alive and well. They're trying to go from Brexit to break it, and we can see where they are putting their power here. We see foreign ministers of France and Germany have revealed a blueprint to effectively do away with individual member states. It has always been about political union. It has not been about even the economics. They begin with a common trade group, and then they use that to push people into a political sovereignty that is distant from them. And they're saying that they're putting this out as an ultimatum. Under the radical proposals, EU countries will lose the right to have their own army, their own criminal law, their own taxation system, their central bank, with all those powers being transferred to Brussels. And again, remember, it was David Cameron who said none of that exists. Oh, but it does. And we have pointed that out multiple times. It was well known to the people who voted, who were baby boomers. They knew where this was coming from. They knew the plan of this. And now we see this being surfacing in the Polish media. They are releasing the details of this. They say the only way to make Europe more than the sum of a member state diplomacies is to make it into a real state. Yes, it is about world government. It is about creating a European superstate. It is about creating a North American superstate and consolidating these different groups into a world government. Now you can see it. Now they brag about it, just as they brag about turning our Constitution into a dictatorship, a living document.
To the surprise of many, and it was a surprise to the market players, rather late, they had to change their tune and found out that the Brexit referendum actually passed.
So I want to start with a question, Dr. Paul, for you. And do you think the establishment will, this is a major blow to them, will they try to reverse this somehow? After all, this vote is not a binding vote. So what are your thoughts on that?
They never give up. It's sort of like the neocons in foreign policy. No matter how badly things turn out, they always come back and say, we have to do more of this aggression around the world. And that's the way it is on these programs like this. Whether it's a Federal Reserve policy where lower interest rates doesn't work and running up debt doesn't work, they never give up because they don't have anything else. Their ideas are bankrupt. So in this case of, the destruction of national sovereignty, the forced integration of many, many nations coming together in a European Union, it was doomed to fail from the beginning. I never believed for once that it would last. It's lasted actually longer than I thought, and it still exists. And the point is this vote doesn't cancel it out. But it sends a strong message, and that message is every bit as strong as a legal message. This is a consensus. I have often argued over the years that it is the will of the people that finally win out in the end. The attitude of the people, the beliefs that they have will eventually, change the government. Sometimes it takes a long time, and with a lot of frustrations, it happens. Because when people are doing well and they're apathetic and naive, they get talked into going to war, but they get talked into these organizations like the European Union. So it takes a while and takes a lot of time for people to really put it all together, and you obviously have to have a leader that tells them what's going on. And in this case, there was a principled British leader who was a member of the European Parliament, and that's Nigel Farage, and he has a lot of reasons to be very excited about this, and a lot of other people. I thought at one time maybe we should get a picture of the ones with where their faces are downtrodden from the consequence of what happened last night, because a lot of the establishment people that were betting against this happening aren't very happy today. But those are the ones who have capitalized and made money off this type of system. But it is coming to an end. The referendum, it doesn't have legal effect. It's a statement, and it's going to take at least, the minimum is 2 years for this to come about and the British actually leave. There will be a lot of votes in the Parliament, but the sentiment and the attitude of the people very strong, because Cameron had to resign from office today, the Prime Minister resigning. So that tells you that public opinion is very, very important. And there's a long way to go, but it is said, because that system was not workable. It was done by force.
What a day when people ignored the entirety of the political establishment and said, we'll decide what happens, not what you tell us. What a day. And of course, this is not the end, it's the start, because these people aren't going to go quietly. But what a start. And we have had a situation where, against all the odds, the majority of the people who voted in this EU referendum have said bye-bye. And very soon afterwards, after the result was given, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who led the stay-in campaign, and basically, along with his Chancellor, George Osborne, embarked on a daily lie fest and fear fest to try to get their way. But it's more than just a referendum result. It goes much deeper than that. And indeed, the result is far more significant than just that, for this reason. Week after week, we have had, like I say, the entire political establishment, whether it's the so-called right-wing Conservative Party or the so-called left-wing Labour Party. I say so-called because they're on the same postage stamp, with one or two honourable individual exceptions. And the Scottish National Party, ditto. And others like the Liberal Democrats and the smaller parties like the Greens. We've had the trade unions in league with the corporations that the trade unions are supposed to be protecting people from. We've had Barack Obama, US President. We've had the Governor of the Bank of England. We've had the International Monetary Fund. Other world leaders. Endless people representing the establishment and the political moneyed classes, telling what they consider, most of them, to be the serfs, that if they don't do what this elite wants, then there'll be dire consequences. There'll be dire consequences for taking your freedom back from dark-suited, faceless bureaucrats in Brussels. And in the face of all of that, the British, the European, the global establishment, all as one, telling the British people how they should come into line and stay in the prison cell. A majority of the people that voted said, "Up yours, darling. We are deciding on our destiny, not you." And what we've seen is this shift from people listening to their masters and alleged betters, the political class of their particular party, telling them what's right and wrong and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. This whole idea of we'll listen to this politician, then we'll listen to that politician and we'll decide what we'll do. We've had this shift to, I don't care what you say. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you do. I've come to my own conclusion, thank you, and I'm going with it. And if we would do that on a larger, more expanded scale across the great spectrum of subjects in society, then we would take all of our freedom back from these self-appointed leaders in their arrogance and their corruption. So it is just an extraordinary happening. All the lies, all the intimidation, all the threats, all of that thrown at us, and still the majority say, we've had enough, we're out of here. But like I say, this is just the start, because I cannot emphasize the potential that this has for throwing a spanner of enormous magnitude into the works of this EU tyranny, which is just a mask on the face of a global tyranny. I've said I'm exposed over decades how the plan is for a world government, world central bank, world army evolved out of NATO, a world cashless currency, and a microchip population. And under that structure is designed to be a series of superstates. The one that's, of course, in place most and is further along the road to where it's designed to go, but nowhere near the end of where it's designed to go, is the European Union. And there are others around the world that are due to follow, just like that. And the idea is not that countries will leave the European Union. It is that more and more will be sucked in to the prison state. So, Britain voting to come out is their worst fricking nightmare. Not least because there are vast numbers of people all over the European Union, in other countries, who are as sick and tired of being dictated to, down to the fine detail of their lives, by people they never see and cannot even name, never mind elect. And what has happened today, has done, is to show it's possible. And I call upon all those people in Europe to come together and bring this nonsense to an end. And that will throw a spanner in the works, not just of the European Union, but of all the other unions that are designed to be evolved, like the European Union, out of free trade zones all over the world. The British people who voted to leave have done the most enormous favour to the rest of the world, if people will only see it. And so let's think about it. We come out of the European Union. There is no TTIP. There is no fascist trade agreement involving the UK called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is being negotiated between the EU and the United States. In other words, being negotiated by corporations on behalf of corporations, for the benefit of corporations, and for further enslavement of the people. If we choose in this country that it's gone, it's gone. That's what it means to come out of this tyranny, and that's what the rest of Europe is sick of. And so it's time for everybody to take their power back from this European Union prison state that is merely a vehicle for the elite. Now, of course, wasn't predictable, was it? There has been turmoil on the financial markets. And we've got to realize, and I'm sure most people do, that these people are going to make it as difficult as possible for us to get out of their noose in any way that will be smooth and easy. And of course, it's not just about freeing ourselves from the European Union. It's also freeing ourselves from the manipulation of the banking system, which is controlled by the same hidden hand that controls the European Union. We have a web with a spider at the center of the web that's pulling the strings of the world. They pull them today, though. And it controls the banking system. It controls the international banking organizations like the IMF, the European Central Bank, Bank of England. And it controls the political system. It controls the corporations. They're just expressions of it. And therefore, they are moving this in hand, and the families like the Rothschilds and others are moving, or able to move, trillions of dollars around the financial markets every day. And so, if they want to frighten people into doing their will by creating chaos on the financial markets, well, they can do it to their heart's content. All they do is buy into something they want to go up and get out of something they want to go down on an enormous scale. So people like the Rothschilds and the Rothschild bagman George Soros, they move their vast amounts of money around, and they're not alone, there's many others in that web, to push the pound up, to push the pound down. And so we need, now we've made this decision, to be strong, steadfast, backbone straight, so we don't get intimidated by all this manipulation, back into the fold, back into the prison, back into the noose. You just look at what's happened when previous referendums have gone against the dark suit elite. What they've done is they've waited a bit, done manipulation in the meantime, got people frightened, oh, I'm not sure it was a good idea to vote what we did. And then they've had another referendum, oh, and they get the result they want. And no, once they've got the result they want, there's never another referendum. So Cameron, the Prime Minister, has said that he's going to step down and someone else is going to take over to do the negotiations to get out. That's when you have to be hawk-like watching these people. They don't spin it like I've just said. Oh, we've got more from them now, we should stay in. And then there's Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the Scottish National Party. And this is a lady who is either so misguided it's breathtaking, or knows what she's doing, who campaign for an independent Scotland within the EU. If ever there's a contradiction in terms ever spoken, that is it. There are no independent nations within the EU. That's why the British people have just voted to get out of it. And you have big nations in Europe completely under the thumb of the EU bureaucrats, dictating in enormous detail what can happen and can't happen, what people can do and can't do. It is another indication that more and more people are awakening to the world as it is, as opposed to the one we're told to believe in. People who are awakening to their own power and awakening to the point where they are taking control of their destiny. They are deciding what they do and what they think, and not some self-appointed dictatorship. And what I've seen, particularly exponentially, year on year on year on year, in terms of people around the world starting to look at the world in a different way, look at themselves in a different way, and ceasing to be told what to do externally. The difference that I've seen in terms of numbers is growing and growing and growing and growing. And this referendum result is an expression of that. Because there would have been a time, and it wouldn't have been that long ago, when this tidal wave of fear, intimidation, blackmail, emotional manipulation and threats would have got the elite what they want. But it hasn't worked this time. And that is something that is highly, highly significant. And we must push it on from here. Not just not letting them tell us how we should vote in a referendum, whether we should be in the EU or not, but that we shouldn't allow them to tell us the nature of reality, what we can and cannot do, what's possible and impossible. That we should be cogs in their machine rather than individual spontaneous expressions of uniqueness, which we all are. It's just amazing to me. And what a gift those that voted to leave in this referendum have given to the rest of Europe. A gift that says, see, if we can do it, you can do it. Let's make sure there is no going back. And out means out. End of story.
It started as a peaceful Black Lives Matter demonstration against recent police killings, just like demonstrations we saw all across the country last night. But as you can see, this turned deadly and chaotic, demonstrators fleeing from the streets while the police officers trying to protect them came under fire, several of them losing their lives. The standoff between the shooter and police lasted several hours. In that time, 12 officers and 2 civilians were shot. According to the Dallas police chief, during the standoff, the shooter said he wanted to kill white people, especially white officers. The sniper has been identified as 25-year-old Micah Xavier Johnson. He's an Army Reserve veteran who served an active duty tour in Afghanistan. He told police he was upset about recent police shootings of black suspects. Now, police ended the standoff by detonating a bomb robot, killing Johnson.
all this racial division that is completely fanning the flames of this entire, what seems to be is a possible race war that's going to happen. Tensions are so hot and heavy right now in America, and everyone is so concerned about these damn labels. Black lives matter. Well, if black lives don't matter, then no lives matter. But we see Black Lives Matter movements and people that are leaders in that movement coming out and calling for the killings of police officers, to run them over and shoot them, to go after white people, to target them. We saw what happened in Dallas this past weekend when multiple officers were shot and killed. That is ridiculous. We need to focus on unifying our country. And how do we do that? Stop labeling everything. But what we need to focus on is the fact that we have a government, a group of elites who want to enslave us all. We are heading towards 1984, and no one sees that. We keep wanting to blame law enforcement. We keep wanting to blame other leaders or white people for the problems that are going on, and completely ignore the fact that there are these global elites who want to enslave us all. And we have people like President Barack Obama, Al Sharpton, calling for the federalization of our police departments. And this is what's going to happen. And it's going to go into a militarized police state run by martial law. We have a corrupt system that wants to enslave you, the African American, me, the white American, people of all races, colors, and genders. And for once, let's unify and let's beat these people.
situation which I think is hard for people to realize, and that is that when Hitler made the agreement to accept the assistance of the reptilians, the German people, of course, were never allowed to even know that this extraterrestrial assistance had been given to the SS. Now, when I said given, they were actually given the hardware, not just one class, but 7, 8 different classes and types, even large cigar-shaped space vehicles. Now, the point here is that this meant that the Germans were totally more advanced and capable of learning how to operate these vehicles and go out in space with the reptilian naval groups and operate with them in the galaxy, essentially doing what Germany was going to do to this planet, which was essentially to take out the people it didn't want on the planet and make the rest of them their slaves. Germany then would have UFOs with speeds capable of close to the speed of light. They had weapons which were so advanced there was nothing that we had here in the United States had any idea of it. They decided we're going to move all of these advanced space systems to Antarctica. And at that particular time, the reptilians, extraterrestrials, had 3 large caverns under the ground, under the ice, down in Antarctica. And they had 2 small ones.
Right.
And so they gave the 2 small ones to the SS, and they then made arrangements so that the Germans would design and build massive submarines as transports. And they started moving the top UFO construction, because Germany went into the construction of these various types of UFOs that were given to them. Those caverns, actually, they were like massive countries. And so what took place then is that as we were, the 8th Air Force and the British were taking Germany out by the bombings, we were like minutes, not years, from losing that war. But it didn't make any difference to Germany, because not just Hitler and his girlfriend went to South America, and so did many of the Germans.
If they had this technology, how did they lose the war?
Easiest way to answer it is that they actually did not lose the war. We didn't win the war. What happened was that the Germans were contacted by all of the U.S. Navy and all of the naval or military intelligence groups in the United States. They went in and made arrangements to take a substantial number of German scientists and bring them to the United States. It was called a paperclip. And it wasn't like there were 6 or 7 of them. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Now, these Germans then actually were assigned into a thing called NASA. And they essentially made up 80 to 90% of NASA. But that wasn't their stop. They continued to distribute out through every top U.S. biomedical and corporations that were in aerospace companies. They then worked in these companies, and they worked to the extent that they took over the finance of these companies. And it's very hard to realize even today that this is still a major controlling element in the United States, and actually in England too. Even Boeing were involved in the actual construction of these kilometer-long spacecraft carriers, that the Navy now has 8 of these spacecraft carrier battle groups out in the galaxy. There's 2 NASAs. There's 2 programs, completely different. The Apollo mission was not just to go to the moon and pick up rocks. We were to build a 2,000-man research and naval base on the moon. They're involved with Solar Warden, and they're involved with bases that we have on Jupiter's moons, which are Solar Warden, and we have bases on Mars. What really bothers me is the regular NASA will have big programs where they build a very large rocket again, which is such an expensive cover-up. That's the reason that disclosure on this whole subject is so important, because there's so many lies, there's so much cover-up that's been presented to the public.